the Privy Council, and in the last few minutes we saw a succession of ex-prime ministers making their way here through the court to go in to the building, from John Major, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, David Cameron, Theresa May, and of course Boris Johnson. And I suspect that there will be a lot of people here who don't have memories of what happened 70 years ago. This will be such a historic moment.
Well, the proclamation of a new monarch is an historic and often pivotal moment in the life of our nation. And it has been 70 years since the last proclamation.
On February the 6th, 1952, came the news of the death of King George VI. The end of the King's reign, the dawn of a new Elizabethan age. Heralded the next day by Sir Winston Churchill.
Famous have been the reigns of our queens. Some of the greatest periods in our history have unfolded under their sceptre. And tomorrow, the proclamation of her sovereignty will command the loyalty of her native land and of all other parts of the British Commonwealth.
Princess Elizabeth was in Kenya when her father died and flew home immediately as Queen. The following day, the new sovereign travelled to St James's Palace to meet with the Accession Council, where she made a personal declaration, pledging that she would always work to uphold constitutional government and to advance the happiness and prosperity of her peoples all the world over. This was followed by the public proclamation at St James's Palace.
Publish and proclaim that the high and mighty Princess Elizabeth Alexandra Mary is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become Queen Elizabeth II.
Since the proclamation of the Queen's great-grandfather, Edward VII, in 1901, St James's Palace has been the traditional home for the ceremony. The proclamation of his heir, George V, was watched by the King's sons, Edward and George, both of whom would become sovereign. First, Edward VIII, who abdicated after less than a year, leading to the accession of his younger brother, the Queen's father, George VI.
Our only lawful and rightful liege lord, George VI, God save the King.
St James's Palace, where kings and queens have been proclaimed for hundreds of years, the rites and rituals of which will be seen and heard once again today.
Well, that will begin, that Accession Council, very shortly, in about 5 or so minutes' time, at 10 o'clock this morning. Part 1 begins in the picture gallery, which is starting to fill up now with members of the Privy Council, the people who have been invited. There they are, gathering in the picture gallery at St James's Palace. And Vernon Bogdan will talk us through again who is there and what we're about to see in this Part 1, because the King will not be there.
The Accession Council is composed primarily of Privy Councillors, and they are mainly senior parliamentarians, leading members of the Church of England, Commonwealth leaders, senior judges, and a few civil servants.
And we can see many leaders, former leaders, past and present there, lining up front row. David Cameron, Boris Johnson was there, Keir Starmer, and they are all members of the Privy Council by right, aren't they? If you're in the Cabinet, you are a member
Indeed.
of the Privy Council.
The majority of Privy Councillors are senior parliamentarians, past and present, and as you say, they are all there today. And it's interesting to contrast this with the film we've just seen of 1952, which was a much more sombre and bleak occasion, and of course it wasn't filmed then. There was a big argument then about whether television ought to be allowed to film the coronation, but here we have the Accession Council being filmed and being open. And this is a sign, I think, of the times that the monarchy has to adapt to a more open and less deferential society, and we can see that
And now,
here.
what we will see very shortly, in fact, everybody's standing to attention.
Thank you very much. The meeting will begin shortly. Please make sure mobile phones are switched off.
So that is the initial announcement, just alerting people to the fact that it will begin shortly. But in a few minutes' time, what we will see is what is called the platform party, who will arrive. And that includes the Queen Consort and the new Prince of Wales. We're having to get used to these titles, but the new Prince of Wales, Prince William.
It is a process of adjustment, as you say. I mean, this has changed. I think things are about to start. As we see there, I mean, in the past, most people there would have been in morning dress at the last Accession Council, and before that, in court dress, in breeches. And of course, today, most people are in lounge suits. It's just another indication of the way times have changed. As you said, Sophie, nobody's seen this before.
But it is a very simple council, part one. What will happen is the death of the Queen will be announced. We will have what is called the Accession Proclamation, which is made without the King present. And then we will see the platform party who will all sign that. They will sign and witness that proclamation. The whole process takes about 10 minutes in total. After that, they will leave the picture gallery and they will all move through into the throne room, which is where the new King will be waiting. But really quite a moment of history there. They all are, front row. Boris Johnson, David Cameron, Theresa May, and nobody really knows what they're about to witness, do they?
They don't. I mean, after the last Accession Council in 1952, Harold Wilson, the future Labour Prime Minister, he said it was the most moving ceremony, most moving ceremonial he'd ever seen. He said that many years later. So there is a very human dimension to this. Once the monarchs, issuing stating the personal declaration, and then the Queen, I mean, with tears in her eyes, was saying, "My heart is too full today to say anything other than I will uphold my father's values." I mean, that's the human dimension. So as well as all the dry and dusty constitutional element, that there is a human core to what we're about to see.
The personal declaration, which is in the second part of the ceremony, will set the tone for the new King's reign. The speech yesterday was primarily a very moving tribute to his mother, the late Queen, but he will, as it were, set out his own position, I think, in the second part of the ceremony.
So what you're about to see is the royal party and the platform party who are moving into the picture gallery now. And within this platform party, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Lord Chancellor, Liz Truss there, the new Prime Minister, the Archbishop of York, the Lord Privy Seal, Penny Mordaunt, who is the Lord President of the Council, who will lead the proceedings today in her new role, the Earl Marshal, the Queen Consort, and the new Prince of Wales.
The business for part one of the Council. My Lords, it is my sad duty to inform you that Her Most Gracious Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, has passed away on Thursday, the 8th of September, 2022, at Balmoral Castle. I propose that, when certain necessary business has been transacted, a deputation consisting of Her Majesty, His Royal Highness, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Lord Chancellor, the Archbishop of York, the Prime Minister, the Clerk of the Council, and myself shall wait on the King and inform him the Council is assembled. I now call on the Clerk of the Council to read aloud the text of the proclamation.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to His mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, the Lords spiritual and temporal of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of Her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless his majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. God save the King!
God save the King!
I now invite those on the platform to sign the proclamation.
So Penny Mordaunt, the Lord President of the Council, and the Clerk of the Privy Council, who are leading the proceedings here today, and the new Prince of Wales, Prince William, signing the proclamation, the accession proclamation that has just been made. He will be followed by the Queen Consort, both Privy Councillors since 2016. And now other members of the platform party, beginning with Penny Mordaunt, who has just taken on this role in the last few days, also adding her name. And the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. And he is followed by the Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell. I'm just going to bring you in here, Vernon Bogdanor, because you've studied this over the years. You've never seen it before. What have you made of it so far?
It is a very moving and solemn ceremony, rooted in the past, but a confirmation of the fact that Charles III is the king. It doesn't make him king, it confirms the fact that he is the new king. And as I say, it's a very solemn and moving moment, which perhaps many of us will never see again.
Indeed. And hearing, as we have done only a handful of times over the past few days, God Save the King, it takes some getting used to, doesn't it, Robert?
It still does, and I think it was very powerful when you saw all those former prime ministers who've known the Queen so well, all together saying, God Save the King, and also the slight tremble in the voice of the Clerk of the Council, Richard Tilbrook, there as he read out what will be the proclamation. I mean, people in that room are feeling very moved, and it's not surprising. And there we see, of course, there's the Earl Marshal, like everyone else, with black armbands. It's, as you said, I mean, this is what we've seen, no one's seen before.
drafts of 8 orders of council. 1. Ordering the proclamation to be printed and published in specialist supplements in the London, Edinburgh and Belfast Gazettes. 2. Directing the Lord Chancellor to affix the Great Seal to the proclamation proclaiming His Majesty King Charles III. 3. Directing the kings, heralds and pursuivants of arms to attend at the Court of St. James to proclaim His Majesty King Charles III. 4. Directing the Lord Mayor, the Court of Aldermen and Commons of London to attend at the Royal Exchange to proclaim His Majesty King Charles III. 5. Directing His Majesty's Secretary of State for Defence to give directions for the firing of guns at Hyde Park as soon as His Majesty is proclaimed. 6. Directing the Constable of His Majesty's Tower of London to give directions for the firing of guns at the Tower of London as soon as His Majesty is proclaimed. 7. Directing His Majesty's Secretary of State for Scotland to cause the proclamation for proclaiming His Majesty King Charles III to be published in Scotland. 8. Directing the Clerk of the Council to issue circular letters for causing His Majesty King Charles III to be proclaimed are hereby approved, and that concludes the business for this part of the Council. I now invite the deputation party to accompany me to wait on the King in the Council chamber.
The Prince of Wales and the Queen Consort leading the platform party out of the picture gallery there at St James's Palace, and a very short 10 minutes or so opening part to this accession council. That was part 1. The proceedings will move shortly into the throne room. The party now goes into the council chamber, which we won't see, but they will all move there and greet the new king. And that is part 1 of this proceedings. There is a lot of change now because not everybody goes into part 2. David Olusoga, your thoughts on what you have just seen? I mean, the language of it is from another age.
It is. I mean, it's a juxtaposition of the very modern and the very old. We've just watched it on television for the first time. It's as significant as the first time cameras were allowed in Parliament. But it is from a world of proclamations where the news of the passing of one monarch and the ascension of another is something that needs to be proclaimed on the streets. The word needs to spread. In the 16th century, after the coronation of a monarch, there was recognition parades. This idea that the monarch must be seen. I think this is all part of that visualisation of this moment of transition.
And the Orders of Council, which we saw Penny Mordaunt reading out, very much, again, something you can understand why it happened centuries ago. It is all about ensuring that the monarchy continues immediately. There's nothing preventing business from carrying on.
It's ensuring that these things, the minutiae, if you like, of a lot of the ceremonial of today and of the days ahead, it's given the ultimate imprimatur. It's hereby, it's official. We might expect there to be gun salutes or whatever. This is saying this is what will happen. And there'll be other orders in council. I mean, the Privy Council directs things like coins and stamps. I mean, there will actually be a lot of change for this body to authorise in the days ahead.
Well, the Privy Councillors are all about to make their way out of the picture gallery at the moment. John Major, Theresa May, David Cameron, Boris Johnson, Gordon Brown, so many faces from the past. I mean, people, as you say, though, who all knew the Queen, who all sought her counsel for years and years.
It's sort of vaguely reminiscent of the state opening of Parliament, isn't it, as the Commons move through to the Lords for another sort of sacred constitutional moment. But, of course, here as Jacob Rees-Mogg, former Lord President, and new Deputy Prime Minister Therese Coffey, former Archbishop of Canterbury George Carey. I mean, we talk about the great and the good. I mean, this I suppose is its embodiment of that sentiment.
And just to be clear again, these are the 200 who have been invited. There are more than 719 in total Privy Councillors. There will be a separation now for part 2, because what I haven't said already is that the Lord Mayor of London and his civic party were in attendance there. They will now head off into London, into the City of London itself, because there will be a proclamation at 12 o'clock in the City of London. But explain, Vernon, the importance of the City of London, the Mayor of London, Lord Mayor of London being there today.
Well, the proclamations, as you say, they relate to a time of the past when we didn't have newspapers, let alone mobile phones, and that was the only way in which you could spread the news towards the whole country. So this is a very traditional part of the ceremony. But the Lord Mayor of London won't be in the second part of the Accession Council, which we're now moving towards. And in that, the new king will make a personal declaration, and he will also take an oath to defend the established Church of Scotland. He later, either at his coronation or at a meeting of Parliament, will take an oath to defend the Protestant religion. Now, these may sound very archaic and out of date to many people, but they relate to the political and religious struggles of the 17th century. And if you think they're out of date, it's up to Parliament to alter them, but the new king has no option but to make these declarations, which have a purely symbolic significance, because if, for example, Parliament decided to disestablish the Church of England or the Church of Scotland, he'd have to sign that legislation. So what we're about to see is very much symbolic without legal significance, but mainly traditional significance. So it shouldn't give offence to those who don't belong to the Church of Scotland or to the Church of England or the Protestant religion.
But we will, for that very reason, see a change of witnesses. So in part 2, in the throne room, Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, she will be on that platform party. She will be there in the throne room as one of the witnesses signing that oath.
Absolutely. The oath derives from the Treaty of Union with Scotland in 1707, which brought Scotland into the kingdom with England and Wales, and it has some symbolic significance perhaps for Scots. I think it probably couldn't be abolished, the establishment couldn't be abolished without the consent of the Scottish Parliament, and obviously Scottish sensitivities are very much involved in this ceremony.
And now they are all gathering there in the throne room at St James's Palace, and it's very, very rare that we actually see inside the throne room, isn't it? Because it's not open, St James's Palace, to the public. But that is a room that has barely changed since the reign of George IV in the early 1800s. I mean, his portrait is hanging there over the fireplace. I think you can glimpse it. But a sumptuous room, spectacular really, isn't it?
That very few of us have seen. A moment ago we were looking at archive in the film of this same event in 1952. And this is a moment, these images are being imprinted as we speak into the national memory. These images will be archived, that will be part of the national memory. So this really is one of those moments when history is happening in front of us.
And the throne there. Nobody will sit except for the new king himself when he signs his declaration and his oath. It is tradition that nobody in the Privy Council sits, is it? Isn't it?
That's right. It's a standing only assembly to keep things short. I mean, it's what it does on a monthly basis. I mean, it could be anything from legislation to do with the Channel Islands to charters of chartered bodies. I mean, it deals with a lot of the things that that Parliament doesn't have the time to deal with. But today, it is at its absolute, the essence of what it's there for, which is to appoint our head of state.
And what we will be watching for is what the king himself says, how much he himself can add, how much the words are written for him, how much he can add himself, what input he has. We don't know.
Well, his speech will be delivered, as almost all his speeches are, on the advice of ministers. But nevertheless, I'm sure he'll have his own personal input into it. But as I said a few moments ago, it will set the tone of his reign, the atmosphere in which he chooses to become king. So it will be worth listening to very carefully, I think.
And while we have not seen what goes on before, we have read about it. And when the Queen, when she made her declaration, hers was fairly brief, wasn't it? She said, I think my heart is too full to say much more.
To say any more than that I will uphold, follow my father's work and govern according to constitutional government. You know, she was very emotional. She was a 25-year-old who'd just flown halfway around the world in a state of shock and was having to do this. A completely different room full of very old, entirely old white men. That's all it was. And one thing we see today is that it's a greater diversity. I mean, you know, it's still a very establishment-looking organisation for obvious reasons, but it is a very different complexion to the Privy Council today. I mean, there are many women there as well. But in her case, she was very young, they were very old, it was a highly charged emotional situation, and there were tears in her eyes. I think today it'll be more of a very sombre, but I think there'll be a much more of the moment feel to the thing.
And you can see, David, just how much our society has changed over the 70 years of her reign, taking a look at that room. As Robert says, when the young Queen stood there, 25 years old, it was men. Absolutely. Now, faces from across the society.
I think it reminds us just how long the reign of the Queen has been. The society of 1952 has so much changed, so much disappeared. And this is a snapshot of the journey that we've been on in the past 70 years, both in all the forms of diversity and, as you said, this incredible gathering of former leaders.
So we're expecting proceedings to start shortly. The King will make his declaration. After that, everybody will leave. They will sign the declarations in a corridor downstairs, and then there will be, at 11 o'clock this morning, a proclamation from the balcony of St James's Palace from Friary Court that we saw earlier.
And we see there also present Baroness Scotland, the Secretary-General of the Commonwealth, underpinning the importance of the Commonwealth here today. I mean, as well as among that 720 members of the Privy Council, there are 40 or so who are from across the Queen's realms, just reflecting and reminding us of the fact that today this is the monarch of not just the United Kingdom but of 14 other countries as well. And as the clerk read out in the proclamation there, I mean, the first thing we heard, head of the Commonwealth, that has already been decided. When the Queen came in, that had not yet been decided. It wasn't clear whether the headship of the Commonwealth, which is not hereditary, had been fully resolved, but that's been set down by all the Commonwealth leaders in 2018 at the London Summit. So, these are sort of small changes, but important changes to today's events.
And the High Commissioners were at part one of the Succession Council. They have now left. This is just the Privy Council who is called here now, but that will be very interesting to see, won't it? How the Commonwealth changes under the new King, what changes he brings to it, what tone he sets.
Well, the Commonwealth has really been the great project of Queen Elizabeth II. It's been the passion of her reign, arguably her greatest achievement. But this is a moment of change even before her passing. It will be interesting to see how many nations for whom this change, to a new monarch, is long-lasting.
Fascinating watching everybody there, sharing memories, no doubt, catching up. And so many of them who spent a lot of time with the Queen, who as Prime Minister will have week in, week out, had their audience with the Queen and really valued that. They've all spoken about how important that was.
There are 6 former Prime Ministers present, and I think it's the first time we've ever had 6 former living Prime Ministers. There's been such a large turnover, particularly in recent years. But as you say, the weekly meeting is very important to them because they say they can say things to the Queen they wouldn't say to their cabinet colleagues or even sometimes to their spouse. And they know that it will not leak and it's entirely private. No one else is present and therefore no minute is taken of the meeting. And it does enable Prime Ministers to unburden themselves, and no doubt they benefit from the fact that the head of state has a different perspective on things and may say, have you thought about this or that? This happened a few years ago, it didn't work out well, perhaps it won't work out well today. And although the King is new, of course, he's got a lot of political experience. He has seen major politicians for many years, he may be able to point out things which occurred before, shall we say, the current Prime Minister was politically aware. And that, I think, is an important part of our system.
The oldest king to come to the throne, isn't he, in British history?
Previously, William IV. And just to think the last time this happened, the Prime Minister was Winston Churchill, and most of the people in the room would have known Queen Victoria. It's an astonishing span of time.
And so part 2 of the Accession Council gets underway. The first time we will see the new king here at St James's Palace. Have the party of witnesses led there by Penny Mordaunt in her new role, who will start proceedings. The Queen Consort, the new Prince of Wales, and there behind them, King Charles III.
Business for part 2 of the Council. Your Majesty, to make your declaration.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is my most sorrowful duty to announce to you the death of my beloved mother, the Queen. I know how deeply you, the entire nation, and I think I may say the whole world, sympathize with me in the irreparable loss we've all suffered. It is the greatest consolation to me to know of the sympathy expressed by so many to my sister and brothers, and that such overwhelming affection and support should be extended to our whole family in our loss. To all of us as a family, as to this kingdom and the wider family of nations of which it is a part, my mother gave an example of lifelong love and of selfless service. My mother's reign was unequaled in its duration, its dedication, and its devotion. Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty which have now passed to me. In taking up these responsibilities, I shall strive to follow the inspiring example I have been set in upholding constitutional government and to seek the peace, harmony, and prosperity of the peoples of these islands and of the Commonwealth realms and territories throughout the world. In this purpose, I know that I shall be upheld by the affection and loyalty of the peoples whose sovereign I have been called upon to be, and that in the discharge of these duties, I will be guided by the counsel of their elected parliaments. In all this, I am profoundly encouraged by the constant support of my beloved wife. I take this opportunity to confirm my willingness and intention to continue the tradition of surrendering the hereditary revenues, including the Crown Estate, to my government for the benefit of all, in return for the sovereign grant, which supports my official duties as head of state and head of nation. And in carrying out the heavy task that has been laid upon me, and to which I now dedicate what remains to me of my life, I pray for the guidance and help of Almighty God.
I have with humble duty to crave your Majesty's permission for the publication of your gracious speech.
approved.
Concerning the security of the Church of Scotland.
I understand that the law requires that I should, at my accession to the Crown, take and subscribe the oath relating to the security of the Church of Scotland. I am ready to do so at this first opportunity. I, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of my other realms and territories, King, Defender of the Faith, do faithfully promise and swear that I shall inviolably maintain and preserve the settlement of the true Protestant religion as established by the laws made in Scotland in prosecution of the claim of right, and particularly by an act intituled An Act for Securing the Protestant Religion and Presbyterian Church Government, and by the acts passed in the Parliament of both kingdoms for union of the two kingdoms, together with the government, worship, discipline, rights and privileges of the Church of Scotland. So help me God.
I now invite Your Majesty to subscribe both copies of the instrument, confirming the oath has been taken.
A signature from the new king on the oath that he has just declared in front of the Privy Council. And now witnesses will also add their signature to the documents.
I now invite the witnesses to His Majesty's oath to sign both copies of the instrument.
And that will begin with the new Prince of Wales, Prince William. He will be followed by the Queen Consort. And now those documents are being turned around because there are other witnesses waiting by the side of the platform who will also add their signatures to it. And just to be clear, Robert Hardman, what we're seeing being signed here, this is about the oath to the Church of Scotland.
Yes, this is preserving the settlement of the Church of Scotland. It underlines the sort of difference in the monarch's role with the Church of Scotland and the Church of England. With the Church of England, that will come separately. We just heard there, in relation to this section of the proceedings, you know, there was no reference to the Church of England. This is all about Scotland. Scotland is where, for the next few days, in fact, a lot of this, our attention will focus as the Queen, the late Queen, is brought to Holyrood House and then to St Giles's Cathedral in Edinburgh. This sort of presages a very Scottish dimension to this.
And that was indeed Alistair Jack, the Secretary of State for Scotland, adding his signature now. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon and Brandon Lewis has already added his signature to the document. You can hear the bands outside taking up their place, because shortly we will be going out into Friary Court just outside these windows, where the new king will be proclaimed publicly. The Lord Advocate of Scotland, Dorothy Bain, adding her signature to both copies of that oath.
There we see in the background the private secretary to the King, Sir Clive Alderton, and the private secretary to the late Queen, Sir Edward Young, standing side by side.
And that the Lord President of the Court of Session, Lord Carloway, who is the last, I think, to sign the oath.
Draft of an order in Council authorising Your Majesty's declaration to be made public.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council for recording the oath relating to the security of the Church of Scotland, to be transmitted to the Court of Session, to be recorded in the Books of Sediment, and afterwards lodged in the State Papers of Scotland and in the Council Register.
Approved.
Draft order in Council determining the form of proclamation for proclaiming Your Majesty in the realms and in the British Overseas Territories.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising the Lord Chancellor to make use of the Great Seal for sealing all things whatsoever that pass the Great Seal until another Great Seal be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising the Lord Privy Seal, if need be, to make use of the existing Privy Seal until another Privy Seal is prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Drafts of 3 orders in Council authorising Your Majesty's principal Secretaries of State, the Lord Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, to use the existing seals until other seals be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising Your Majesty's Secretary of State for Northern Ireland to make use of the existing Great Seal of Northern Ireland until another seal be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising Your Majesty's First Minister of Scotland to make use of the Great Seal of Scotland until another Great Seal of Scotland be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising Your Majesty's First Minister of Wales to make use of the existing Welsh Seal until another Welsh Seal be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising the public seals authorising the respective public seals lately in use elsewhere than in the United Kingdom to be made use of until new seals be prepared and their use duly authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council confirming Your Majesty's wishes in relation to the Sovereign Grant Act 2011 to continue the tradition of surrendering the hereditary revenues, including the Crown Estate, to your government for the benefit of all, in return for the sovereign grant, which supports your official duties as head of state and head of nation.
Approved.
Drafts of 2 proclamations. 1. Appointing the day of Her late Majesty's state funeral as a bank holiday in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. 2. Appointing the day of Her late Majesty's state funeral as a bank holiday in Scotland. And of 2 orders in council directing the Lord Chancellor to affix the Great Seal to the proclamations.
Approved.
I now invite Your Majesty to sign both proclamations.
The continuation, wasn't it, of it's making sure there is nothing in the way for this new monarch, that business can continue as usual. The speed of this, though, is quite something, isn't it?
It is something, and I thought in the King's declaration, I mean, he was out of his way to emphasise continuity. Continuity, that's what monarchy stands for. Everything I do will be following the inspiring example of my mother, he said. You know, irreplaceable, he called her. There was a human dimension in there as well. He talked about his sister and his brothers. But there was business in there as well. Very interestingly, he alluded
and that,
to
Your Majesty, concludes today's business for the Council.
So the royal party leave the throne room there at St James's
May
Palace.
I now invite the deputation party and the witnesses to the oath to exit via the picture gallery and the matted hall. I now ask Privy Councillors present to exit via the picture gallery and the matted hall and invite you to sign the proclamation, which is laid out in the lower corridor. Thank you all for attending today.
And so that is the end of proceedings at the Accession Council, the first time we have ever witnessed what goes on behind closed doors. I was struck, though, watching Prince William, the new Prince of Wales, as he watched his father, because unlike the new king, he now knows what will happen to him when he becomes king.
Yes, I mean, of course, Prince Charles was a tiny boy when his mother was going through this in 1952. He was back at home, and in fact, hadn't seen her for days. And yet, as you say, I mean, there is the new Prince of Wales, getting a very clear idea of, you know, this is how destiny is going to be.
Well, I'm joined also in the studio now by Elizabeth Buchanan, who is the former private secretary to the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall, as they were then, and by Lord Simon Woolley, who is the principal of Homerton College. Lovely to have you both with us. You both know the new king. You have had dealings with him. You have worked very closely with him, Elizabeth Buchanan. How do you feel watching him there with the Queen Consort? You know the man very well, and what a moment for him.
What a moment, but it is so emotional, and yet it is so seamless, and he just wears the mantle of kingship with such grace and dignity and elegance and humility. And I just kept thinking as I watched this, thank God we live in this country, and thank God for the new king. He is going to be a remarkable king. He knows this country intimately. He knows this country probably better than any politician, because he has travelled it for decades. He knows the world. He knows the Commonwealth and the realms. He understands the people, and he minds deeply about them all. And he will bring all that wisdom and all that experience to the new role that he now holds, and he will do it remarkably brilliantly. I have absolutely no doubt.
But what we must remember when we were watching him there is it is less than 48 hours since his mother died. And the private grief, he has had very little time to deal with that. It's very public now all of a sudden, isn't it?
It's very public, but do you know the thing about the fact all members of the royal family but the Prince of Wales as was the king now. The sense of service to others. He knows this is his role, this is his destiny, and he will be putting before all else the people of this country and the realms and the Commonwealth. He knows the role he must fulfill, and duty and service are what runs through his veins. And that's what you have seen today. He is grieving for his late mother, and you could see it in his face yesterday, and yet he has assumed the mantle of kingship with such elegance. And there was actually no void. People feared that. There was a sense, oh my goodness, there will be a void. There was no void. It was seamless, it was perfect, and we are so blessed.
And Lord Willie, I'm very interested to know how you think the new king will be as a monarch. Yes. You've had dealings with him in the past, you've spoken to him at length.
Right.
And it will be a very different reign from that of his mother, won't it?
It will, but there's extraordinary proceedings, historic, that we've just watched, and I feel humble just watching it, seeing it being played out with all the former prime ministers and really the whole world watching. And I think has been said, this sense of duty that the king has had for many, many years. And some of us, like Elizabeth, we've been lucky to see it up close and personal. And you see when he's in a room with maybe 150 people, he will go around to each one and make them feel the centre of his attention and important to that moment. And that is a sense of duty, a sense of purpose, which actually I think he's taken from his mother. And it's extraordinary to see.
And unlike his mother, though, he has waited so long to become king. He is king at 73 years of age.
Yes.
This has been a long time coming. So he has been able to watch his mother over the years, over the decades. He has seen firsthand what she does. The Queen, so young when she came to the throne and so unexpected. It is very different, isn't it?
It is very different, but I think it's a time to find his own voice. And I think, as has been said, he travels around the world, around the country, speaking with young people, with old people, with people like myself. You know, when we met, I was a political activist. Today, Martina Milburn said to the then Prince, I think you need to speak to Simon Woolley. And so, you know, within a heartbeat, I'd got a call to say that the Prince would like to speak to you. And I thought we were going to have a conversation on Zoom. But you know, it was COVID.